Welcome to your overview video for Chapter 21, the Later Romantics. Our learning objectives are number 1, to identify some of the most important composers in Germany and Austria in the late 19th century, and describe briefly one or more characteristic works by each of these composers. And number 2, to name some of the most prominent classical European composers active outside of Germany and Austria in the late 19th century, describe some of their music, characterize their styles, and explain their relation to the dichotomy between musical nationalism and internationalism. The second half of the 19th century saw a widening gulf between classical and popular music, debate, and division within German music, and a new importance gained by national traditions. By 1850, concert programs increasingly focused on musical classics. Scholars unearthed and published music of the past, especially from their own nations, issuing editions of complete works and performing editions. Performers and audiences had a variety of old and new music available to them, which satisfied the desire to hear new pieces as well as familiar ones. Brahms and Wagner represented two sides of a dispute regarding absolute versus program music, tradition versus innovation, and classical genres and forms versus new ones. Yet partisans on both sides shared common goals and wrote classical music. Franz Liszt, 1811 to 1886, was the most astounding piano virtuoso of his era and one of its most important composers. He studied piano and composition in Vienna and Paris and pursued a career as a concerto virtuoso until 1848. While in Paris, he met many of the most noble writers, painters, and musicians of his day. He later devoted his career to composing, conducting, and teaching. He worked in Weimar and Rome, where he took minor orders in the Catholic Church. Liszt toured all over Europe giving solo piano recitals, a concept and term he pioneered, and changing the way pianists performed in concert. Liszt was influenced by Hungarian music, by Viennese and Parisian virtuosos, and by Chopin. Niccolò Paganini, 1782 to 1840, who raised both the technique and mystique of the virtuoso, was perhaps the strongest influence. Liszt's Un Sospiro shows the same level of technique found in Paganini works. Un Sospiro also illustrates Liszt's innovative use of chromatic harmony, third relationships, and whole tone and octatonic scales. Liszt composed numerous character pieces. His innovative sonata in B minor combines aspects of three movements in one extended movement. Much of Liszt's piano music consists of operatic paraphrases and transcriptions of vocal and instrumental music. Liszt moved to Weimar in 1848 and focused on composition. He wrote 13 symphonic poems, programmatic works for orchestra whose content and form were suggested by a person, a story, an artwork, or something else outside music identified by the title and usually by a program. Liszt used thematic transformation, a process of transforming a theme or motive into new themes to provide unity, variety, and narrative-like logic to a composition. In his choral works, Liszt reinterpreted the past, often deriving melodies from plain chant. Liszt's symphonic poems, chromatic harmonies, and thematic transformation influenced other composers. Anton Bruckner, 1824 to 1896, an organist, absorbed Wagner's style and ideas into the traditional symphony and wrote church music that united the technical resources of 19th century music with a reverent approach to sacred texts. Influenced by Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Bruckner wrote 11 symphonies, none explicitly programmatic. Bruckner's Fourth Symphony, from 1874 to 1880, opens like Beethoven's Ninth, and its continuous development of musical ideas is characteristic of Beethoven and Wagner. Bruckner's religious choral music blends modern elements with influences from the Sicilian movement, which promoted a revival of the 16th century a cappella style. Johannes Brahms, 1833 to 1897, used virtually all musical languages of his time and drew heavily on elements from past classics, integrating them into music that appealed to a wide range of listeners. As a child, Brahms studied piano, cello, and horn, developing a love for past composers as well as for folk and popular music. He had a close relationship with Robert and Clara Schumann, who were instrumental in launching his career. Brahms made his living as a concert pianist, conductor, composer, and editor. He was the leading German composer of his time in every field except opera and an important influence on 20th century music. Brahms developed a highly individual piano style marked by broken chord figuration, cross rhythms, and melodies doubled in octaves, thirds, or sixths. He wrote three early sonatas, 1852 to 1853, and then focused on variations. In the 1880s and 1890s, Brahms issued perhaps his grandest contribution to keyboard literature: 6 collections of intermezzos, rhapsodies, and other short pieces. 7 of Brahms's chamber works featured piano with strings, including 3 piano trios and 3 piano quartets. As exemplified in the first movement of the piano quintet, he used what Schoenberg called developing variation, in which a musical idea is varied to create a string of interrelated but different ideas, producing both unity and variety. Brahms felt Beethoven was an almost overwhelming influence and waited to write his 4 symphonies until he could create something fresh while following Beethoven's example. The First Symphony, 1876, absorbs Beethoven's influence fully, but also blends in other models and new ideas. As illustrated in Symphony No. 3, 1883, Brahms often used wide melodic spans, cross relations, and metric ambiguity. The finale of Symphony No. 4 from 1885 is a chaconne, a set of variations on a bass ostinato adapted from a Bach cantata. By blending elements from the past with the present, Brahms created music that sounds individual. Brahms also brought a distinctive sound to his concertos. All of Brahms' choral music was composed for amateur performers. Ein Deutsches Requiem, a German requiem from 1868, uses biblical passages rather than the liturgical requiem text and combines Baroque procedures with rich romantic harmonies. Although often called a conservative, Brahms was a model for 20th century composers in creating new, individual music that drew deeply on the past. Tchaikovsky, 1840 to 1893, was the leading Russian composer of the 19th century, and he sought to reconcile the nationalist and internationalist tendencies in Russian music. Tchaikovsky studied law and worked as a civil servant before enrolling at the St. Petersburg Conservatory and then teaching at the Moscow Conservatory. Troubled by depression, financial worries, and sexual identity, he eventually found a measure of stability in the patronage and friendship of Nadezhda von Meck. Her support allowed Tchaikovsky to resign from his teaching position and devote himself entirely to composing and conducting. At the peak of his fame, he died, prompting some to see several of his last works as offering a premonition of his death. In his 2 most important operas, Eugene Onegin, 1879, and The Queen of Spades, 1890, Tchaikovsky used a variety of Russian styles and materials, not just folk music, to provide national flavor. Tchaikovsky wrote the most famous and frequently performed ballets in the permanent repertoire, including The Nutcracker from 1892. Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, 1893, contains novel musical elements, including a waltz in quintuple time and a closing slow movement. The third movement begins with a light character and gradually evolves into a triumphant march. The 2 principal Bohemian or Czech composers of the 19th century were Bedřich Smetana, 1824 to 1884, and Antonin Dvorak, 1841 to 1904. Smetana sought to create a national music in his string quartet number 1, From My Life, from 1876, and in his cycle of 6 symphonic poems titled Ma Vlast, My Country, from 1872 to 1879. Many of Dvorak's instrumental works are in an international style, but he also wrote pieces that use elements from Czech traditional music. His best known symphony is number 8 in E minor from the New World, 1893, written during his time spent in the United States and drawing elements from the music of American Indians and African Americans. Dvorak wrote 12 operas based on Czech village life, Czech fairy tales, and Slavic history. In his Slavonic dances for piano, four hands, or orchestra, 1878 and 1886 to 87, Dvorak used elements from Czech traditional music to achieve a national idiom. For your 26-point quiz, I would know about the following. Know about musical classics. Know about Eduard Hanslick. Know about absolute music. Know about Franz Liszt and the piano recital. Know about a symphonic poem, what it is. Know about Liszt's Un Sospiro. Know about Wagner's influence on Bruckner. Know about Bruckner's orchestration. Know about Brahms, his piano output. Know about variation with Brahms. Know what a chaconne is. Know about the relationship between the Schumanns and Brahms. Know how Brahms's requiem is different from typical requiems. Know about Tchaikovsky. Know about Rubinstein. Know about Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony. Know about Smetana's Tabor. Know about Brahms's influence on Dvorak. Know about the influences on Dvorak's Ninth Symphony. Know about Dvorak and Czech nationalism. Know what program music is. Know what thematic transformation is. Know about Beethoven's influence on Bruckner. Know about Beethoven's influence on Brahms. Know about Schoenberg's comments on Brahms. And know about Tchaikovsky's use of Alexander Pushkin's work. And that should do it. Good luck.